Was it mere lust or cold-blooded manipulation that led to a beheading at a royal banquet? Imagine a dance so provocative it ends in a prophet's gruesome execution. Dive into the darkly seductive world of Salome, where a single performance could demand a man's head as the ultimate encore. In the land of Judea, under the scorching sun of the Roman Empire, King Herod Antipas reigned with a blend of opulence and iron fist. His kingdom, a striking contrast of lush Galilean meadows to the north and the relentless Judean deserts to the south, served as a vivid canvas of power and struggle. At the heart of this domain stood the fortress of Machaerus, a towering testament to Herodian grandeur and Roman architectural prowess. Its massive walls and grand halls echoed the footsteps of soldiers and whispered secrets of royal intrigues. As the ruler of such a diverse realm, Herod's days were filled with the delicate art of governance, balancing the opulent displays required to impress Roman dignitaries with the simmering discontent of his Jewish subjects. The cultural tapestry of his kingdom was rich but fraught with tension. In cities like Sepphoris and Tiberias, Roman theaters and bathhouses stood alongside synagogues, each stone a symbol of the uneasy blend of Jewish traditions and Roman modernization that characterized his rule. Herod's efforts to fortify his position through splendid public works and strategic alliances were double-edged swords. They showcased his allegiance to Rome and his commitment to bringing Roman civilization to Judea, yet they also deepened the divides within his kingdom. The locals, burdened by taxes for these grand projects, clung to their ancestral customs and eyed their ruler's lavish lifestyle and foreign patrons with growing resentment. As King Herod Antipas prepared to celebrate his birthday, his palace was a cauldron of political intrigue and social unrest. The grand halls of Machaerus, usually a symbol of Herodian strength, now played host to an uneasy assembly of Rome's loyalists and skeptical Jewish leaders. With each passing day, the air grew thicker with anticipation and silent disputes as the king navigated the treacherous waters of allegiance and rebellion. Outside the fortified walls, the people of Judea grappled with the realities of Roman rule, the heavy taxation that funded the king's lavish projects, and the ever-present Roman soldiers patrolling their streets. The imposition of foreign customs and religious insensitivity by the Roman authorities only fanned the flames of discontent among the devout Jewish populace, creating a fertile ground for dissent. In this simmering pot of cultural and political tensions, John the Baptist's voice rang clear and harsh. His fiery sermons, filled with bold denunciations of Herod's marriage to Herodias and calls for repentance, echoed through the countryside, drawing crowds of disillusioned souls. His message, while spiritual, carried deep political undertones, challenging Herod's authority and questioning his moral legitimacy as a ruler. Herodias, Herod's ambitious and scheming wife, viewed John the Baptist not just as a personal affront, but as a political threat. Her resentment towards the Baptist was palpable, his public rebukes a stain on her husband's reign and her own status. Herod, though visibly troubled by John's popularity and prophetic zeal, was caught between his fascination with the preacher's charisma and the need to appease his wife and maintain stability in his kingdom. The night of King Herod's birthday feast arrived, cloaked in the opulence and tension that had come to characterize his court. The palace of Machaerus, with its walls adorned with exotic tapestries and its tables laden with sumptuous dishes from across the empire, thrummed with the energy of a kingdom at the brink. Distinguished guests, clad in fine linens and glistening jewels, mingled under the flickering light of oil lamps, their laughter and conversations a veneer over the undercurrents of political machinations and whispered alliances. As the wine flowed and the music swelled, the atmosphere thickened with expectation. Herod, ever the astute ruler, played his role to perfection, lavishing attention on his guests, his eyes frequently seeking approval from the Roman dignitaries present. Herodias, by his side, masked her simmering malice with a practiced smile, her mind plotting over the hum of festivity. In the midst of this grandeur, Salome prepared herself in the seclusion of her chambers. The young dancer, aware of the night's significance, felt the weight of expectations on her delicate shoulders. Coached by her mother, Herodias, she understood that her performance was more than an act of celebration. It was a play for power, a dance that could sway the fate of a man and the course of her own life. In the sprawling kitchens of Machaerus, the air was thick with heat and the clang of pots and pans. Chefs from across Herod's territories had been summoned, each tasked with crafting dishes that showcased the empire's culinary diversity. Exotic fruits were arranged into towering displays, meats seasoned with rare spices sizzled on spits, and vintage wines from Rome's finest vineyards were uncorked. The preparation was as much a testament to Herod's wealth as it was to his strategic diplomacy, aiming to impress every palate in attendance. Outside, the palace grounds were illuminated with torches and decorated with silks and flowers, transforming the rugged fortress into a beacon of festivity. Servants moved silently, their efficiency a dance of its own, setting the stage for an evening designed to be remembered. The banquet hall, a vast chamber with walls draped in Tyrian purple and gold, slowly filled with the murmur of Herod's distinguished guests. Among them were Roman officials in their ornate togas, local nobles, and high priests, their expressions a mix of anticipation and caution. Herodias, with her keen sense of court dynamics, navigated the crowd, her smile a mask that barely concealed her calculated observations. She engaged in whispered conversations, her eyes sharp for any sign of dissent or support. Meanwhile, the topic of John the Baptist, who had been recently imprisoned on Herod's orders, served as a subtle undercurrent in discussions, reflecting the division among the attendees. His denunciation of Herod's marriage had not only embarrassed Herodias, but also challenged Herod's authority, making the atmosphere as charged as it was celebratory. As the final guests settled into their seats, a lull fell over the banquet hall. The opulence of the setting, with its grand columns and expansive tapestries depicting scenes of Herodian victories, contrasted sharply with the tension that underlay the evening's pleasantries. Salome stood behind the heavy curtains of the stage, her silhouette barely visible. She listened to the low hum of the assembled crowd, feeling the weight of the moment. Her dance was more than a performance. It was a pivotal fulcrum upon which the evening would tilt. Every step had been choreographed to captivate, her movements practiced to perfection in the days leading up to the feast. The musicians tuned their instruments, their notes a prelude to the drama that would unfold. As Herod raised his goblet to signal the beginning of the festivities, all eyes turned toward the stage, awaiting the dance that everyone sensed would be no ordinary entertainment, but a spectacle woven with fate and desire. The moment the banquet hall's curtains drew back to reveal Salome, a collective breath seemed to be held within the opulent room. Lit by the soft glow of oil lamps, her figure appeared almost ethereal, draped in veils that glistened like dew on cobwebs. Each layer of fabric, delicate and translucent, hinted at the contours of youth and grace beneath, designed to tantalize and tease the imagination of every onlooker. As she stood poised at the center of the stage, the hall fell into a deep silence, the kind that precedes the storm, filled with anticipation and the unspoken expectations of the royal court. Her initial movements were slow, almost tentative, as if she was testing the waters, feeling the mood of her audience. Her eyes, dark and knowing, scanned the assembly, locking briefly with King Herod's, whose gaze was fixed upon her with a mixture of paternal pride and a more troubling hunger. The music that accompanied her entrance was soft, a haunting melody that seemed to rise from the very walls of Macaris itself. The musicians, strategically placed behind sheer drapes, played an array of ancient instruments, their tunes weaving through the air, setting the rhythm that would drive Salome's dance. The melody was familiar, yet it carried a new weight tonight, each note heavy with destiny. As Salome began to move, each step was measured and full of purpose. Her dance was not just a performance, but a narrative told through the language of her body, a tale of beauty, power, and the thin line between them. With each turn and sway, her veils lifted slightly, revealing glimpses of her form, crafting a visual poem that spoke of innocence, edged with the promise of revelation. Her movements initially mirrored the softness of the music, her body flowing like water, her arms rising and falling with the elegance of swaying branches. This deliberate grace set the stage not only for the spectacle to come, but also for the dramatic crescendo of her performance. It was clear to all who watched, captivated, that this was no ordinary dance. This was a prelude to something momentous, a dance that would change the course of many lives. With the audience now fully under her spell, Salome's movements began to transform. The slow, fluid motions that started her performance gave way to more vigorous, passionate expressions of dance. As the music swelled, her dance intensified, the rhythm becoming as palpable as the beating hearts of the entranced onlookers. Each drumbeat echoed in the hall, mirroring the increasing tempo of her steps. The musicians, sensing the shift in energy, skillfully adjusted their pace, their notes rising and falling with the arcs of Salome's twirls and leaps. Salome's veils, once gently swirling around her, now whipped through the air with a fierce grace, as if they were alive, extensions of her own will and emotion. With each spin, she seemed to shed another layer of her public persona, revealing the raw power and seductive force she wielded through her art. The veils, a myriad of colors, created a visual spectacle that mesmerized the audience, blurring the lines between dancer and dance, the seen and the unseen. Her technique was flawless, a testament to years of training and innate talent. Each leap and pivot was executed with precision, yet it was the passion she infused into every movement that truly captivated her audience. Her eyes, smoldering with an unspoken challenge, flirted with the boundaries of the acceptable, daring her onlookers to confront their own desires and fears. As she danced, the atmosphere in the banquet hall shifted from one of rigid formality to a collective experience of raw emotion. Guests found themselves leaning forward, breaths held, pulses quickening as Salome drew them deeper into her performance. Even Herod, who had seen the dance rehearsed in privacy, found himself caught off guard by the intensity and sheer force of the spectacle now before him. The climax of her dance approached, and with it, the air in the room thickened with anticipation. Her movements became a frenzied yet controlled storm, each step and spin amplifying the emotional charge that filled the space. The dance was no longer just a performance. It had transformed into a powerful statement, an assertion of her influence over the king and all who watched, spellbound by her command of the floor. As Salome concluded her mesmerizing dance, the room pulsed with a palpable tension and awe. The music slowly ebbed away, leaving only the echo of its last notes hanging in the air, but the energy of the performance lingered, electrifying the atmosphere. King Herod, visibly moved and perhaps emboldened by the wine and the charged ambiance, rose from his ornate throne-like seat, his eyes never leaving Salome. The guests, aware of the king's reputation for grandeur and impulsive gestures, waited with bated breath as he began to speak. His voice, though tinged with the effects of indulgence, carried a sobering weight across the silent hall. "Ask of me whatever you wish, and I will grant it to you, up to half of my kingdom," Herod proclaimed, his words echoing off the stone walls, imbued with a mixture of royal magnanimity and a dangerous lack of restraint. The offer was staggering, even for Herod, known for his lavish ways. His courtiers exchanged glances. Some masked their concern with cautious smiles, while others, more astute and politically savvy, sensed the potential for disaster. This was not merely a king speaking in a moment of pleasure. It was a ruler, ensnared by beauty and performance, making a public commitment that could have far-reaching implications. Herod's advisors, standing at the periphery, felt a chill of foreboding. They understood the volatility of such a promise, a vow made not in the privacy of a council chamber, but openly, in front of his allies, enemies, and the Roman observers, who meticulously noted every detail of his conduct. This was a power play gone awry, a moment of personal weakness that could spiral into political crisis. Salome, amidst the sudden spotlight of Herod's extravagant offer, maintained a composed demeanor. Inside, however, she calculated the implications of her next move. Under the watchful eye of her mother, Herodias, who harbored deep animosity towards John the Baptist, Salome knew that her response could satisfy a personal vendetta while forever altering her own place in the royal narrative. As the echoes of Herod's vow faded, the room awaited Salome's response with a tense anticipation. The young dancer, her performance still lingering in the eyes of the audience, approached Herod with a grace that contrasted sharply with the gravity of the moment. Her steps were measured, each one deliberate, as she made her way towards the king who awaited her wish, his expression a mix of adoration and anxiety. With the entire hall's attention riveted on her, Salome turned to confer briefly with her mother, Herodias, who whispered fervently into her ear. The advice from Herodias was not just a whisper, it was a directive, charged with years of resentment and calculated malice against John the Baptist, who had dared to publicly condemn her marriage to Herod. Herodias saw this as an opportune moment to rid herself of this troublesome prophet once and for all. Returning to Herod, Salome's voice was clear and unwavering as she made her chilling request. "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The hall, filled just moments before with the warmth of wine and the thrill of dance, fell into a stunned silence. The audacity of the demand shocked the assembly. Guests exchanged disbelieving glances, and some recoiled in horror. This was not the boon they had expected. It was a macabre twist that turned the festive atmosphere into one of morbid disbelief. Herod himself was taken aback. His face, usually composed and kingly, betrayed a flash of horror and regret. He had indulged in what he believed was a harmless flirtation with grandeur, a king's overture to a favored subject. Yet now, he found himself trapped by his own words, a public vow made in front of his court and Roman guests who watched keenly, understanding the political implications of whatever his next actions would be. With the weight of his own words hanging heavily upon him, King Herod felt the cornerstones of his palace seem to tremble under the burden of his promise. The chilling request had been made, and now it was his duty, however dreadful, to uphold it. His gaze, pained and regretful, swept over the assembled guests, their expressions ranging from shocked disbelief to morbid fascination. There was no turning back. With a somber nod, he summoned his executioner, a silent figure cloaked in the shadows of the banquet hall, waiting for the king's command. The executioner, well versed in his grim duty, understood the magnitude of the task at hand. His steps were solemn as he made his way to the dungeons where John the Baptist was held, a prophet whose only crime was speaking the truth too boldly in a court where truth was a currency few could afford. The heavy clank of his keys echoed through the corridor, a foreboding sound that signaled the finality of the decision. Back in the banquet hall, the atmosphere had turned decidedly somber. The guests murmured among themselves, some in hushed tones of fear, and others in whispered debates over the morality of the king's decree. The air was thick with tension, the earlier revelry forgotten, replaced by a collective sense of participating in a historical moment marked by its stark brutality. As the executioner carried out the deed, the reality of the situation began to settle in. John the Baptist, a man of the cloth who had roamed the desert, calling for repentance and baptizing many, was to meet his end not for his actions, but for the words he had preached. This stark injustice resonated deeply within some guests, stirring a mixture of fear and disillusionment with Herod's rule. When the executioner returned, bearing the grim token of John's head on a silver platter, the sight was ghastly and provoked a visceral reaction from everyone present. Salome accepted the platter with a practiced composure that belied the horrific nature of the trophy she had requested. Herod, watching this unfold, felt a profound sorrow and a foreboding sense of doom. His kingdom, he realized, would never be the same. The act, carried out to satisfy a momentary whim and a vengeful heart, would forever stain his reign, echoing as a somber testament to the dangers of unchecked power and rash promises. As the executioner placed the silver platter bearing John the Baptist's head on the banquet table, a heavy silence descended upon the room. The stark reality of what had transpired was almost too surreal to grasp. The sight of the platter sent shivers down the spines of the guests, serving as a macabre reminder of the power and cruelty that could emanate from the throne. Salome, her face inscrutable, handed the platter to her mother, Herodias, whose eyes gleamed with a dark satisfaction, her long-held vendetta finally fulfilled. Herod himself felt a deep unease stir within him. The applause and adoration that had earlier filled the hall were now replaced by a chilling quiet. His subjects' eyes, which once looked upon him with respect and fealty, now bore into him with a mixture of fear and judgment. The king's impulsive promise had led to a brutal spectacle that overshadowed the festivity of the evening. Herod sensed a shift in the undercurrents of his court. Respect was giving way to fear, and loyalty was fraying into unease.